Welcome to sunny San Diego for Gravity this season. This series of videos will bring you principle-driven strategies and techniques for the sports of swimming, biking, and running, kind of a triathlon theme. So we hope that these videos bring you innovative ways to think about how you're training your clients, whether recreationally or competitively, for any of the following sports. This segment is for swimming, specifically the twisting component of the stroke. Now we're going to be looking at a freestyle stroke as part of our principles. We know that we're looking at a freestyle stroke and we're land-based, so it gets a little bit tricky. Now we can get into the intricacies of swimming, but we don't want to get too boggled down. Let's just try to keep it kind of general so that we can take a look at how the kinetic chain operates during a swim or a freestyle stroke and apply it to gravity training. Other principles involved. We know that the freestyle stroke, or any swimming really, is a full whole body movement, and there's coordination involved. We have resistance in the water. So there's kind of a debate whether water activities are closed chain or open chain. For me personally, I think of it as a closed chain activity because we're reaching through the water and propelling ourselves through. So it kind of falls under that whole mu factor of friction as to how much friction there is, whether something's moving or not moving. We're getting resistance against the water to propel ourselves. So for me, it's a closed chain activity. Now, other principles are our environment. Whether you're in a triathlon and you're dealing with turbulent waters, swimmers all around you, or if you're in a pool just swimming recreationally, you're going to have a little bit of difference there, but we'll try to keep it broad so it covers all of those environments. Now, when we talk about the twisting component, what we mean by that is that there is a twisting of the body to get through the water to ensure that the stroke arm or the catch arm comes up out of the water and doesn't get caught up. If you're going through the water in a prone position, you're going to set the shoulders up for injury or overuse. So the key to a nice freestyle stroke is to twist yourself through the body or through the water in order to get the arm up out of the water and to allow the rest of the body to help the shoulder out when it comes to the catch and the drive through. Now, with regards to sequencing, the shoulders and the pelvis are going to be moving in the same direction. We keep that in mind during our training. So what happens is that the shoulders actually drive the pelvis into rotation. As we drive through the water, we come across in that transverse plane, and what that does is it's going to bring the pelvis across, so into rotation. Now the other planes, the sagittal plane and the frontal plane, we'll talk a little bit more in a different video, but for this one specifically, we're talking about that twisting component. So with those principles set up, we have to come up with strategies. The strategies are going to be to load and explode the hips, either using the shoulders or the upper body, in order to successfully get the body into almost kind of like a keeling position through the water. We just remember that the pelvis lags, so it's in sync, but it's following the shoulder movement. So what we're going to do is start to apply this to the GTS, and what we're going to need is a swimmer. Right? So we need a swimmer, and we're out by the water here in Mission Bay, and I'm looking around, and here's our triathlete, Nicole, to help us out with swimming. Hi, Nicole. Let's do a little handshake there. Now we're going to get Nicole set up with the scrunch board. If you don't have the scrunch board, you can either use the press bar or just your hands on the floor or the lower base. What we're first going to do is work on kind of a proximal strengthening or proximal stability of the trunk, but having the pelvis rotated to kind of facilitate and wake up the proprioceptors, the muscles, the connective tissue, everything associated with the movement. So we're going to load and explode with the hips in rotation. So we're going to set her up in a scrunch, an inverted position. What we'll do is kind of have you in here, and she's going to kneel kind of towards the top half. She's going to get into kind of a loaded position, a closed chain position with her upper body. And she's going to tweak her pelvis now. So she's going to take her knees and rotate them either side. We're going to cover both. So her knees, instead of being directly on the glide board, are pivoted to about 2 o'clock. So what this does, when she presses the glide board up and she really gets down and eccentrically loads this hip with the pelvis tweak, so we're getting a rotational component. So what we're doing is we're lengthening the muscles eccentrically as we do in function, and then exploding, kind of exploding, not really heavy explosion, but we'll focus, instead of going through that full range, on just the wakening up. So we're gonna go from here to here. So it's really just a load, explode. It's really just to get those, the abdominal muscles, the hip flexors, the quads, all the muscles kind of fired up, the proprioceptors get turned on so that they know exactly what's gonna happen. So this is called a GTS scrunch. We're using the glide board with her knees in a position. You can go to different degrees of rotation. You may even be able to change the incline. With this exercise specifically, you can take a little break. When you bring the incline down, you're going to increase the intensity of the loading of the anterior hip. If you bring the incline up, you're going to overload the upper body a little bit too much. So find kind of a mid zone and find out what works with your client. So we'll take a look at the other side here so you get a full view, that we really get a nice lengthening of the front of the hip. And we're just, again, load, explode, load, explode. And she's got her hips kind of rotated. Now, when we look at these exercises, you know that when we're in the water that the pelvis is going to rotate more. This is just kind of to turn the proprioceptors on. So that's kind of our first exercise, is just using the GTS scrunch. You can go ahead and stand up.
Okay.
We've also, like I mentioned, you can use your hands on the floor, the press bar, any of those. And before we get any further, I know that there are thousands of techniques of how to swim. Again, we're just going to talk globally with the trunk, or one specific joint, or one specific strategy. So if you know swimming, or you're a swimming coach, use everything you got. Just kind of think this way. Think load and explode, and think that it's kind of a reaction between the glide board and the scrunch board, that you're creating kind of a fulcrum through the pelvis. Our second exercise is torso rotation. So again, we're going to work on that rotation of the shoulders that are going to drive the pelvis. So let me pull the scrunch board off here, and I'll just get this out of the way. And we're going to put the pulleys up into a nice high position, and I'm going to keep them wide so that we can get a nice specific line of pull, maybe even a couple different lines of pull. And what we're going to do is actually go through rotation, and then I'm going to show you how to tweak it, maybe with like a surfer lat pull. So I think everybody knows how to do torso rotation. I'm just going to focus a little bit more on what the hips are going to do. So let's go ahead and have you in a high kneeling position. Now, the reason we use high kneeling here is because it's going to allow the pelvis to rotate more. When you get down into it, basically this exercise for swimming, as you bring the client down into a seated position, you change the fulcrum and you increase the torque between the pelvis and the trunk, because the pelvis can't move. So now we have the pelvis in a position to where it can move, and that's what our focus is. So this is a good example of why you change an exercise specifically for a technique or a strategy. So we're in a nice position here. She's got her shoulders kind of drawn back, and she's going to go through rotation, but really emphasize coming through with the hips. So almost like you want your hips facing whatever part of San Diego that is over there, right? Good. So she's bringing it through the shoulders. As the shoulders move, you can see that they're driving the pelvis in that transverse plane for rotation. So this still follows the same strategy as we did in the scrunch board, of kind of strengthening and turning on the proprioceptors proximally. We're focusing on this particular component of the body, and then as we move on into other videos, we'll get up into the upper bodies and into the shoulders. So you can see that we have a nice line of pull here. Obviously, if she extends her arms out, that's going to increase the load. So you increase the lever, you increase the resistance. So real simple torso rotation. Now, to get more specific to swimming, we're going to put her into a surfer lat pull position. And I'm going to bring the pulleys back into just a general number 2 position. Now what we've got here is, we're going to talk a little bit about the seated position, the low kneeling, and the high kneeling as well. We'll start in a high kneeling. And again, we're kind of moving backwards here, because we know in our gravity personal training course, we teach that a progression from less stable or more stability to less stability. So we're going to move her into the least stability position, into high kneeling, again, to allow the pelvis to rotate. Now, Nicole, what you're going to do is you're going to go through kind of a surfer lat pull, but with one arm, I want you to drive back and rotate. And again, we're going to try to rotate the pelvis with the arm. So let's come through with the right arm. Yep, just come back with one arm. So as she comes up and rotates, you really want to focus on trying to get that pelvis to come around the same direction that your arm's going. because remember, the pelvis and the shoulders are in sync. It's just which one moves first. To make this a little bit easier, let's just go up to a high kneeling and try a few. This might get a little tricky. We're going to challenge her stability today. So what we're doing is going through that extension component of the shoulder. We're going through, if we want to add a little more specificity, we can almost bend the elbow and go into internal rotation. That's what's happening in the water, along with a little bit of adduction of the shoulder. So she drives her.
A lot going on here.
Yeah, there is. I got a ton going on. I'm trying to picture you in the water right now. It's working real well. So we're looking for a nice flat wrist. And then if you want to get to a different line of pull, she would go down into low kneeling and just flex at the hips. So we'll keep you down this time and do the same thing as she drives through the water, brings that shoulder up against my hand. There you go. And then back. So now the pelvis is a little more locked in, but we're still getting some of the nice back extensors rotating, some of the deep muscles of the lumbar, thoracic spine going. And you're getting a nice, things start to look a little bit more like swimming here. Okay, I think that's fine, Nicole, thank you. Go ahead and anchor out. And what we're gonna go into now is kind of a lying prone position. And you guys know this exercise called the swimmer. It's in your manuals. This is where it's gonna start looking more and more like swimming. Now, with the lying prone position, the first thing we're gonna do before we add the cable is just to go into some head drivers. And let's review drivers real quick. Everything that we do in function typically is driven by something, whether it's your hand, like we're talking about the arm driving the shoulder, which drives the pelvis. So our driver is going to be our head for this sequence. Nicole has no idea what I'm going to do right now, so this is great. So she's going to lie prone, and I'm going to actually raise the incline a little bit if you don't mind. That way our viewers can get a little better glimpse at what's happening. Now she can just put her feet on that lower base so she doesn't slide down on the sidewalk. And what we're going to do is just use the head as a driver. Now quickly, what happens in swimming, and we'll talk about this, is this is what happens to me when I swim. My head comes up because I want to breathe. As soon as you bring your head up, your pelvis drops down, you look like a seahorse going through the water. So the object is to keep your body up on top of the water. And just that cue, when someone told me to keep my darn head down, then all of a sudden my pelvis went up. Now, it would have been probably better if I would have tied a hot air balloon to my pelvis to keep it up higher, but that's not really realistic. So we're going to use head drivers, and this is going to be against what I'm saying, but we're doing this to kind of open up the chest and drive the head in 3 planes so you understand what drivers are, and for this specific movement, it's going to be the head. So we're going to drive the head and cervical spine into extension and flexion. So we're just going to come up, and let's go a little bit more in thoracic. There you go. Come up and then back down. And what we're doing is just, again, waking up the proprioceptors, and it's more about this loading here and then the exploding. It's not really exploding, but we're just going to use the head to drive through the sagittal plane. And then we're going to do kind of a goofy walrus one in the frontal plane where you're going to kind of come up and diagonal. So you bring your heads to this side. Good. Don't worry about that rotation yet. Just kind of bump your ear over to my hand. So come up, yep, there you go, and up a little bit more, up into extension a little more, there you go, and then down, and then back up to the other side, alternating sides, or you can go one side. And then, of course, the most important is going to be that transverse plane where she's going to rotate the cervical spine, which hopefully will bring the shoulder up a little bit as well. And this is important for breathing. As you're driving through the water, if you have to use the sagittal plane to breathe, it's going to drive your pelvis down in the water. So you want to look at your client's ability to rotate the cervical spine in order to take those very important breaths. Very, very important. So if you wanted to balance or do oppositional training, I might just bring her into a supine position and do the same thing. So you work with gravity in doing loading, exploding from extension to flexion, lateral flexion, and rotation. Maybe you use the head as a driver, maybe you use the shoulder as a driver. Okay, off to swimming. We're going to attach the pulley. I'll bring your incline down a little bit. Okay. And you may have to keep your incline up a little bit high, which is going to be tricky because we don't want the client's knuckles scraping across the gym floor, or in this case, the bike path. Okay, so we're going to give her both handles. Okay, well, what we're doing here is we're going to drive. Now, we know it's a full body movement, so if you want to add leg kicks, that's fine. And there's different techniques. I know that there are flutter kicks. There's a 6 repetition flutter kick where it's 6 kicks per cycle. Some people go down to as few as 2. So what we'll do is, just for fun, we'll have her legs kicking, but drive the arm down through. So you'll see is her elbow is bent just slightly when she comes through. Let's just go through that beginning component a few times. That drives this internal rotation of the shoulder, which is a component of the catch and the drive through. And as she comes back, she's going into a little bit of adduction of the shoulder and obviously the extensional component. Now, as she comes up this time, I really want her to bring that shoulder up off the board. And again, we're getting this, it's not, we don't want her to drive the pelvis off the GTS, but to see a little bit of an excursion through the hip. So maybe the hip just comes up slightly. Kind of tough, especially if we had the kick. So as she goes through a few repetitions, maybe switches sides here and there, you'll start to see it starts to look a little bit more like swimming. And what she's doing really nicely is adding that cervical rotation. So the more you can get the neck to rotate, the easier it's going to be for them to breathe and to use the transverse plane versus using the sagittal plane during the swim. All right, Nicole, very nice. So those are just a few tips for swimming and for the twisting component. If you wanted to do other exercises, I mean, if you look at the upper body and how much is used for swimming, we're looking at the chest, we're looking at the back, we're looking at the lats, we're looking at the hips, we're looking at the whole body. Another thing to do is maybe drop the lap bars down and just have a client hold on to a lap bar and just go through that movement pattern. If they can get that movement pattern where they're coming through internal rotation, shoulder adduction and extension simultaneously, and then maybe driving the hip back up. So you're driving the hip with the shoulders in sync, but the pelvis just lags slightly behind. So we hope those techniques that are principally and strategically driven bring you new and innovative ways to think about how you're training your clients for the sport of swimming.